Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is The Economic Depression by Manly P. Hall, an article taken from The All-Seeing Eye, Volume 5, Number 9, June 1931. The Economic Depression by Manly P. Hall. The present financial crisis is the favorite topic of conversation. Persons in every walk of life gather in solemn conclave to explain and predict. Experts in matters monetary mumble their findings as they attempt to determine from the terrifying statistical comparisons how much worse any given condition can become before it must either improve or utterly destroy itself. Class-bound proletarians, judging the whole by their own particular part and weighed down by the sense of their own responsibility in the matter, have a hopeless feeling of impotence in the face of facts. While there is scarcely a person who is not certain that he knows what should be done, there is not one who can really suggest a feasible way to end it. The explanations offered for the cause of the present condition are as diversified as the walks of life from which they come. To some, the corrupt condition of the political machine is held to be mainly responsible. A somewhat similar state of affairs must have existed in Greece over 2,000 years ago, for it inspired an ancient philosopher to declare that laws are like spider webs. They catch the small malefactor, but the greater thief breaks through and escapes. A second group points to the prohibition question, declaring that the illicit sale and consumption of liquor, in which some 40 million persons are concerned, has unbalanced the whole economic mechanism. A third part insists that the racketeering and gang hoodlumism that the prohibitionists unwittingly precipitated upon the country by deflecting huge fortunes from their legitimate ends has thrown a great balance of economic power into the hands of the openly defiant antisocial forces. The tariffs are held by quite a number to be at least indirectly responsible for the invalid state of the dollar, while the machinations of our banking system have been loudly sung by a large chorus. There is an ever-increasing realization in all quarters that machinery is not only jeopardizing, but in many cases has practically destroyed the economic integrity of the individual. Labor is menaced by an age of steel. Everyday manual labor in some line of industrialism gives way to mechanical contrivances. It is the laboring class that represents the national strength, and many feel that most of the present difficulties are due to the exploitation of these millions of wage earners. It is facetiously remarked in the big city that the Woolworth building was built with dimes. And while the purchasing power of the proletarian is not great per capita, its aggregate assures national prosperity. The Great War is still regarded in many quarters as a relevant factor in the present dilemma, not only because of the vast amount of international debt, collectible and uncollectible, but because of the peculiar psychological effect upon the nations involved. The world is shell-shocked. Proportions and values have been lost or perverted, and the precedent established for all forms of lawlessness and destruction. America is not only speculation conscious, but speculation crazy. The big crash about a year ago created a panic such as could only exist where gold held chief place in men's hearts. The pulse of the stock exchange still flutters badly. In fact, if the truth were known, the whole institution suffers from an incurable disease, and relapse will follow relapse until the system of fictitious values is overthrown. The women also come in for their share of the blame, it being affirmed that their entrance into the economic field has disturbed a precedent of centuries and nearly doubled the number of those desiring employment. With such logic, it is reasoned that when there is more than one breadwinner to a family, there must almost inevitably be a family without a breadwinner. Thus, while machinery is cutting down the possibility of employment, there is an enormous increase in the number seeking remunerative work. Acts of providence are also included among the causes of the present situation. Droughts throughout the Middle West, with their attendant privation and the collapse of banking institutions, and, if you wish to include absconding bank presidents among acts of providence, have added to the general perplexity. Of course, some are bound to observe the unhappy spectacle of capitalistic Neros strumming their harps while Rome burns. Even now, when the fate of the whole system is at stake, the process of squeezing out competition still continues, and almost hourly small organizations are crashing, adding their investors and stockholders to the body of the indigent. In New York, they tell the story that when it was discovered that the unemployed were making a living by selling apples on the street, the powers that be immediately raised the price of apples. The whole matter is rendered more discouraging by the fact that every effort to improve conditions is exploited by someone who cannot get his mind off dollars long enough to share a crust of bread with a starving fellow creature. The milk of human kindness is pretty thoroughly skimmed. In passing, the problem of the credit system must also be touched upon. This country has taken to buying its luxuries and even its necessities at so much down and so much for the rest of life. The optimistic white collar buys a home, automobile, radio, piano, furniture in general, jewelry and clothes all at the same time on a small down payment and mortgages his future for 99 years. Even in the best of times, such a procedure is disastrous, but in this century of kaleidoscopic changes, it is utterly fatal. For what he doesn't actually wear out, he loses. Certain fields of advertising contribute to this delinquency, for the average citizen believes what he reads, and being luxury-loving by nature, is easily tempted into extravagance. Of course, capitalism in general receives its share of criticism, but most of this, unfortunately, comes from people who themselves tried to be capitalists, but did not make the grade. Every proletarian is a potential capitalist without money. The fact that labor makes no provision for itself in times of plenty cannot be ignored as a factor in hard times. The Soviet and the communists are also pointed at as insidious disseminators of catastrophe, and each diagnostician of the present crisis points at the graft and abuses existing within his own field of vision as illustrative of the general demoralization. This list of causes could be continued indefinitely, but the above is sufficient to reveal the general scope of the grievances. Having thus diagnosed the cause, which is a sort of complex compound fracture of integrity, we can pass over the effects lightly, for any remarks on the subject would be classified as pessimistic and even fatalistic. When it comes to the subject of cure, the dilemma is apparent. The disease is so widely distributed and the whole body social so completely infected that a panacea is almost inconceivable. That which would cure one phase of the trouble would complicate another. A vicious circle exists. Civilization at this time may be likened to a drug addict with gold as a sort of economic morphine. It is a well-known fact that many drug addicts die of the cure, and drastic methods applied to the present situation would probably bring the whole structure of civilization tumbling upon our heads. We might ultimately be better for the fall, but the reconstruction period would be one of the most difficult adjustments. Buddha declared ignorance to be the common disease of mankind, but it would seem that we should go still further and declare selfishness to be the most dangerous and most universal form of ignorance. The world in general, and America in particular, is suffering from the fact that very few people can forget themselves long enough to think of anybody else at all. The philosopher knows that the seat of all injustice is within man himself. The finer faculties are easily obscured by passions and desires. A very small minority of this race really knows how to live. The rest exist by circumstance alone, in utter servitude to uncontrolled emotions and excesses. There seems to be but one way by which man can learn to live, and that is by dying. Each age is swept away in a holocaust of its own intemperances. A civilization, planned by men and built by men according to the laws of men, must vanish because of the weaknesses inherent in man himself. There may rise up some with broader vision who can lead the children of this race a little way through the Red Sea of their desires. The cataclysm may be averted for 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years, but unless integrity takes the place of selfishness, the end is inevitable, and over such ends the philosopher does not grieve. The only release from the present circumstances comes in release from possession, from attachment, and those factors which are the fundamental elements of the dilemma. A philosopher was once asked what wise men did when they could no longer eat. His answer was, they starve. The disasters which are occurring around us are really not as important as they seem. It is a terrible thing to have all that we have and love swept away. Yet we seldom realize that it occurs to all of us at death, regardless of how successful our living seems to have been. There is no beggar on the street who has less than the greatest financier after death has separated him from possessions. A wise man once said that the quickest way to get a thing is to stop wanting it. To fortify oneself for trying periods, the realization of true values is essential. If each individual will live as well as he knows, if he will perform conscientiously that which is his appointed task, and divorce from heart and mind all thoughts of profits and reward, he may gain in poverty and distress a peace which he never discovered in success and power. To paraphrase a famous Teuton, if we must starve, let us starve philosophically. A path will probably be found which will carry us temporarily through the crisis. Realizing that this trying condition will arise again, the wise, however, will equip themselves and leave to their heirs a legacy of knowledge that will enable them to meet such future recurrences in a more rational manner. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.